Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad you could join us today.
Absolutely.
We're about to plunge into, well, a market that might sound super specific,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually fundamental to some major industries globally.
It really is. It's one of those pieces of equipment that just works away behind the scenes, you know,
Yeah.
essential for turning raw stuff into products we use or eat every single day.
Exactly. So today we're pulling back the curtain on the global two-roller mills market.
Right.
We've got a pretty fascinating stack of source material here, specifically market data and projections from cognitive market research. Goes right out to 2033.
And it's quite detailed data. Gives a really good look at where the market is now, where it seems to be heading, and, what forces are actually pushing it forward.
So our mission really in this deep dive is to unpack this data stack for you,
Mm-hmm.
pull out the key insights, understand the main drivers, the regional trends, basically what's shaping this market now and, well, over the next decade or so,
Yeah, we'll try and navigate through all these numbers and trends together.
highlighting what really matters.
Think of us as guides through this landscape. We'll point out the important signposts in the data.
Okay, let's unpack this. So first off, before we really jump into the numbers, maybe we should quickly set the stage.
Good idea.
What exactly are two roller mills? And, what role do they play in the industries this data talks about?
Okay. So at their core, they're machines, right? Designed to crush or grind materials between two rollers. Pretty simple concept.
Right.
In the context of this market data, they're really crucial for processing things like grains, seeds, maybe other materials for food production, animal feed, brewing, definitely, and agriculture. The key thing is they provide a consistent particle size,
Ah,
and that's vital for, quality and efficiency in those processes.
got it. So they're the workhorses breaking down ingredients for
Yeah.
things like flour or beer, maybe livestock feed.
Exactly,
That immediately ties them into fundamental global needs, doesn't it? Food, feed.
for sure.
Okay, with that context, let's look at the big picture, the global view from this data. What's the scale? What's the general trend?
Well, the source shows a really clear and consistent upward trend. No ambiguity there.
Okay.
So the global market was valued at just over $1 billion back in
Mhm.
2021, at $161.6 million to be exact.
Over a billion.
Yeah. By 2025, that's projected to climb to $1,325.1 million.
Hmm.
And then looking further out towards 2033, it's expected to hit $264.7 million. Quite substantial.
Wow. Okay. So projected to nearly double in what, just over a decade?
That's right.
That suggests pretty solid demand, doesn't it?
It really does.
What about the pace? What's the global growth rate according to the data?
It's expanding at a steady compound annual growth rate, the CAGR of 5.7%.
5.7%.
Yeah, over that whole forecast period, 2021 to 2033.
A consistent 5.7% globally. That sounds like a pretty healthy pace.
It is.
And what are the main engines? What's driving this expansion based on the source material?
The data points to, well, a few key global drivers.
Okay.
One is just ongoing innovation in design. So mills are getting better, more efficient, maybe more specialized.
Right. Makes sense.
Another is the increasing demand for cost-effective processing solutions. These mills often fit that bill. And interestingly, the source specifically calls out the rise of small-scale breweries
Oh, yeah.
and food processing units worldwide.
That is interesting. So it suggests growth isn't just the massive industrial players, but also maybe a boom in smaller operations.
Seems that way, yeah. It's part of the mix.
Let's keep those drivers in mind then, because they probably explain why some areas might be growing faster than others.
Good point.
So where does this data show the most dynamic growth happening?
Okay, Asia Pacific. It's clearly identified as the powerhouse region in this market.
Powerhouse, right?
Its market share was already the largest back in 2021, $433.1 million then. But its projected growth is, well, it's remarkable. It's expected to hit $559.3 million in 2025.
Okay.
And then surge to $920 million by 2033.
Wow, $920 million. That's pushing towards, what, nearly tripling its value from 2021?
Just about, yeah. It's huge growth.
Which explains why it has the highest regional CAGR, I assume.
Absolutely. Asia Pacific leads with a strong 6.4% CAGR.
6.4%.
And within that region, certain countries really pop out in the data.
Yeah.
China's a major force, obviously.
Uh-huh.
Projected to reach $387.2 million by 2033. That's with a solid 6.8% CAGR.
But the source highlights even faster growth somewhere else in Asia Pacific, right?
Correct, India. It's forecasted to show, well, pretty explosive growth,
Okay.
rising from $53.3 million to a really remarkable $124.9 million over that same period.
$124.9 million from $53 million.
Yeah, and that translates to the highest TGR among all the major countries mentioned in the source, a striking 7.2%.
7.2% CAGR in India.
Yeah. So if we connect that back to the drivers we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
like demand for cost-effective processing, rise of small-scale units,
Mm-hmm.
does that suggest those factors are maybe particularly strong in a rapidly industrializing economy like India? It lines up really well with that idea. The data strongly suggests that as industries like food processing, brewing, maybe feed, expand rapidly there,
Yeah.
the need for this kind of fundamental
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
expand rapidly there,
Yeah.
the need for this kind of fundamental efficient equipment is accelerating even faster than the regional average.
So it really highlights where some of the most active market development is happening right now.
Exactly.
What about other parts of Asia Pacific? Does the data mention others?
It does. Japan shows steady growth, looking to double its market size over the period.
Okay.
South Korea and Australia are also projected for robust expansion, both getting past $60 million by 2033.
Right.
And the source specifically mentions Southeast Asia gaining significant traction.
Southeast Asia.
Yeah, its market more than doubling, from about $22.5 million to nearly $49.7 million by 2033.
And is there a reason given for that Southeast Asia growth?
Yeah, the source explicitly links it to industrialization and increasing demand for post-harvest processing.
Ah, post-harvest. So needing to process agricultural stuff more efficiently after it's harvested.
Precisely. Ties right back to the basic function of these mills.
Okay. So Asia Pacific clearly setting the pace. Where else are we seeing strong market expansion according to this data?
Europe is also a very significant market and shows promising growth, too.
Okay.
It contributed $226.1 million back in 2021, and it's projected to reach $429.6 million by 2033.
Right. And the growth rate.
Its CAGR is 5.5%, just slightly above the global average.
5.5%. How does that break down within Europe? Are there any sort of standouts like India was in APAC?
Well, maybe not hitting those 7% plus levels, but yeah, several European countries show strong momentum.
Like
The United Kingdom, for instance, projected for a solid 6.4% CAGR.
6.4% for the UK. Okay.
And Germany is set for 6% growth.
Right. So both of those are notably above the European average rate.
They are, suggest maybe specific areas of strong demand there, or perhaps quicker adoption of, newer mill designs.
And other big European economies, France, Italy, Russia.
They show steady, significant growth as well. KGR is mostly in the 4.9% to 5.5% range.
Yeah.
They all reach pretty substantial market values by 2033.
Mm-hmm.
Even smaller countries mentioned, like Spain and Luxembourg, show healthy expansion.
Okay.
And then there's the rest of Europe category, which includes like Eastern and Nordic countries.
Right.
That's projected to grow at an impressive 6.3% CAGR, nearly matching the UK and Germany.
That rest of Europe figure is interesting, suggests quite strong growth across a pretty diverse set of markets, maybe less obvious ones.
It does seem that way, yeah.
Okay, let's move over to North America. How does it look there?
North America is another major region for these mills. No surprise there. Its market size was $252.7 million in 2021, projected to grow to $471.1 million by 2033.
And the CAGR?
5.4%, so pretty much right in line with the global average.
Okay, 5.4%. And how does that North American growth compare country by country?
Well, the United States is the biggest market within the region naturally. Shows strong growth, reaching $324 million by 2033. That's with a 5% for the U.S.
5% for the U.S.
Steady, yeah. But similar to the India situation we saw in Asia Pacific, Canada is a bit of a standout here.
Really? How so?
It's projected for a 6.2% CAGR, taking its market from around $44 million up to $96 million by 2033.
6.2% for Canada, higher than the U.S. rate.
Yeah. And Mexico is also on a strong path, 6.1% CGR projected there too.
So while the U.S. market is large and growing steadily, Canada and Mexico are actually projected to grow significantly faster in percentage terms.
That's what the data suggests, yes.
That's a key insight, maybe points to particular demand dynamics, maybe in feed or brewing perhaps, in those specific countries within North America?
Could be. The data doesn't specify the exact subsector driving it country by country,
Right.
but the faster growth rate is clear.
Right. What about other parts of the world covered in the source? Latin America?
Latin America shows a generally positive trend. Brazil's projected for steady growth, increasing its market quite significantly by 2033. Other countries mentioned, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile, they show moderate but, consistent growth rates,
What kind of rates?
generally between 5% and 5.6% CAGR. So indicating broad regional expansion, just maybe not as explosive as parts of Asia.
Okay. Steady growth across Latin America. And finally, how does the Middle East and Africa compare?
This region, according to the source, shows more restrained growth compared to the others we've discussed.
Slower.
Yeah. Countries like Egypt and Turkey, for example, are each projected to grow at a 2.8% CAGR.
Okay, 2.8%.
And the rest of the Middle East category shows the slowest expansion mentioned anywhere in the source, just a 1.3% CAGR.
1.3%. So still growing, but the pace is notably slower than, say, Asia-Pacific, Europe, or North America.
Definitely a different speed of growth indicated there.
Right. So this data really paints a clear picture then. A market with varying regional speeds, but a consistent overall direction driven by those, fundamental needs for processing materials.
Exactly. The data consistently shows an upward trajectory across the board. Even in the regions with slower growth rates, it's still positive. Underscores how essential this equipment really is.
Okay. So, based on everything we've just unpacked here from this deep dive into the source material, what's the overall summary we can offer you, the listener? What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the overwhelming picture from this data is that the global two-roller mills market is definitely on a consistent, positive upward path for the foreseeable future, at least out to 2033.
All right. A solid upward trend globally. And the strongest performing regions, the ones really leading the pack based on these numbers, are clearly Asia-Pacific,
Definitely.
Europe, and North America, all showing pretty robust growth rates, either above or right around that global average.
Correct. And while other regions like Latin America are growing steadily and the Middle East and Africa show, let's say, more restrained growth in this data, the overall market direction is still positive everywhere.
And we saw how those key global drivers that the source identified, things like innovation in design, the demand for cost-effective processing, and especially that point about the rise of small-scale breweries and food units, they seem to be fueling this growth and potentially explain the faster rates we see in dynamic economies like India or maybe markets like Canada within North America.
Yes, the data really seems to align well with those drivers. Suggests they are powerful forces shaping where and how quickly this market is expanding.
Well, that was a really insightful deep dive into the numbers and trends behind two-roller mills. It's actually fascinating to see the global dynamics playing out in these essential, if maybe overlooked, industrial markets.
It is.
Thank you for joining us as we unpack that data stack.
Our pleasure. It's always interesting to dig in and find the stories hidden within the market numbers.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, here's a final thought for you to consider, something stemming directly from the insights we've just discussed from the source material. Considering those remarkable growth rates projected in specific countries, think India at 7.2% or Canada at 6.2% compared to the overall global average, and frankly, other major countries mentioned in this data. What does this data suggest about where future...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
What does this data suggest about where future innovation in mill design, or perhaps the most significant shifts in demand, might actually be concentrated in this seemingly niche global market over the next decade?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where's the cutting edge likely to be?
Something to think about as you look at the bigger economic picture and the fundamental industries driving it all.
Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Until the next deep dive. Okay, let's jump in. Today we're doing a deep dive into maybe a less obvious market, but a really key one, two-roller mills. We've got some interesting analysis here from cognitive market research we've been looking at.
That's right. And the goal today is, well, to cut through the details and really pull out what matters. What's pushing this market, what are the roadblocks, and what new trends are popping up.
Yeah, give you that clear picture based on the source material.
Exactly. A concise overview.
So maybe start simple. What exactly are two-roller mills? Why are they still relevant? The source says they're mainly for crushing grains.
That's the core function, yeah. Crushing grains, think breweries processing malt, food processing to flour, animal feed, and agriculture itself.
Okay.
They're kind of fundamental. That first step in getting grains ready for, well, almost anything. Simple tech, but foundational.
And the source seems pretty clear on what's driving the demand. It looks like a big piece is just more activity in brewing and food processing generally.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the rise in processed foods globally,
Right.
or the whole craft beer explosion.
All right.
Both need consistently processed grains. So demand for reliable mills like these stays strong.
The data also mentions cost effectiveness and energy efficiency being big pluses. That seems important, particularly for maybe smaller setups.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a huge point. Their design is just simpler than, say, a complex multi-stage mill.
Less power needed.
Less power, lower upfront cost usually, easier maintenance.
Yeah.
It really opens the door for, microbreweries, local feed producers, smaller food businesses, people who can't necessarily splash out on the big complex gear.
And there was something about agriculture in emerging markets as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. As farming gets more mechanized in some regions, you need processing closer to the farm gate.
Ah, okay.
2 roller mills are relatively portable, pretty straightforward to use. They fit well into that kind of decentralized rural processing model, less need to ship raw grain long distances.
Got it. So core industry demand, cost benefits for smaller players, good for decentralized use. That's pushing things. But there are always downsides. What did the research highlight as the main constraints?
Well, the big one is output. Their efficiency and overall capacity are limited. They're really built for modest scale.
So not for giant factories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not great for really tough materials. And they just can't handle the massive volumes, the throughput that big industrial operations need.
And I guess that constant grinding action must lead to wear and tear?
Precisely. You've got constant pressure on those rollers. They wear down.
Which means downtime, maintenance?
Right. Needs regular upkeep, parts replacing, adds to the running cost, can interrupt production. It impacts the overall efficiency.
And they're not the only option out there, are they? Competition's a factor.
For sure. If you look at the bigger picture, you've got technologies like multi-stage roller mills.
What's the advantage there?
Much finer control over the grind, the particle size, and significantly higher capacity. So for those large-scale users where consistency and volume are everything, these advanced systems often win out. That's a real challenge for the 2 roller mills in that high-end market segment.
Okay, so limitations on capacity, maintenance demands, and competition from fancier tech.
Ah.
But it's not all challenges, right? The source pointed to some interesting trends, ways the market is adapting. Customization was one.
Yeah, that's about making the tech more flexible. Manufacturers are adding features like adjustable roller spacing, variable speed control.
Letting users tweak things.
Exactly. Fine-tune the mill for different grain types, different results. It makes this older tech much more versatile, more attractive to users with very specific needs.
And the craft brewing angle is interesting. Why is that niche such an opportunity?
It's huge for them because the quality of the crush is just so critical for craft beer.
How so?
Well, 2 roller mills, when set up right, can give a really consistent crush, but crucially, with minimal fine flour. That consistent particle size, low flour, it's key for efficient sugar extraction, later the lautering process, and helps avoid unwanted flavors, astringency. Directly impacts the beer's taste and clarity, things craft brewers obsess over.
Makes sense. And the last trend mentioned was smart integration. Automation. Seems a bit high-tech for simple machines.
It might sound it, but it's giving them a new lease on life. We're seeing things like IoT sensors being built in.
Really? What do they monitor?
Things like roller pressure, grain flow, temperature maybe, all in real time. The point is better consistency, less need for constant manual checks, optimizing the whole process. It brings some of those efficiency gains you used to only get with big, complex systems down to the 2 roller level.
Huh. So, yeah, they face limits, they face competition, but it's definitely not a static market. They're evolving customization, hitting specific niches like craft beer, even getting smarter with tech integration.
Exactly. It's an interesting balance, isn't it? Proven, cost-effective tech, finding ways to innovate and meet today's demands.
Which kind of leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? As you go about your day, maybe consider this. How might this mix this traditional affordable tech getting smarter? How might that change decentralized processing, not just for grain, maybe for other industries entirely?
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.